Good afternoon and welcome back. It's Uncle Phil with the Frixer now. You're very familiar with him and his work at this point, and his style of doing things brings a lot to this. We're so glad to have him and glad to have him joining part of the Uncle Phil family this year. As promised, we're on to our next division in the AFC. We're working our way down the schedule here, and we're going down now to the AFC North. And again, we always go in order of teams, and that, I mean, when you think of the AFC North now, it's hard not to think of the Baltimore Ravens automatically. Joe, what do you think of the Ravens this year? Is it their year this year?
Okay, well, just to remind you guys, if you haven't listened to the other podcasts, so I'm the Frixer because I break things while fixing them, and I'm only dangerous when I think I know what I'm talking about. So I don't know very much about the AFC North. I don't watch it a lot. But I am an NFL fan.
That certainly helps your credibility here, Joe.
Yeah, well,
Thanks for keeping the people engaged.
So here's my take about the Ravens. They're dominant. I mean, they're a great team. They got a great quarterback. Lamar Jackson has proved all the doubters wrong, and he's a real quarterback, and a real dual threat. And John Harbaugh is a great coach. I think the guy is amazing. And Todd Monken is an amazing offensive coordinator. I wish the Georgia Bulldogs had kept him, but they're back with with the old guy who's not as good. As far as hot takes about the Ravens, they're going to continue to be great. I don't see any sign of regression in them. And it's just like just like the Buffalo Bills, man. It's just a question of can they get over the hump and win one. So what do you think, Phil?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is widely considered the best organization in the entire league. You mentioned, how they were so buttoned up and how this team continually does well. And, we talked about in our previous episode, we kind of ended it on a little bit of a sour note with the Jets. And we talked about Woody Johnson, of how he is not a very good owner, and that's why situation normal is with him. But situation normal in a good way here, because the owner, Steve Biscotti, is just as involved as Jerry Jones in the organization, but he's so behind the scenes because he doesn't want the credit. And he gets super involved. He's involved with the draft. He does a lot of things, but he's collaborative. He's not this guy, and he's not an attention seeker, but widely considered one of the better owners in the league as well. Look, you mentioned it starts and stops. It's quarterback, head coach, right? It's quarterback, head coach, GM, ownership. You've got A+, right across the board, very much like you do with the Chiefs, and that's why those teams continue to do well. Starting off with Lamar Jackson. This is a passer rating stats. You and I both are more comfortable with a QBR because it contextualizes things more than adds the value of other types of statistics that we think are better. But it's something. And if you look about the best passer ratings in NFL history, minimum 400 attempts, Aaron Rodgers has got the first two with 122.5, 121.5 respectively. Then Peyton Manning with 121.1 in different seasons. Last year, Lamar Jackson had the fourth best passer rating in NFL history with 119.6, just above Tom Brady at fifth with 117.2. And it's just outstanding. The problem with Lamar, which is kind of, right or wrong, it's going to dog him, and historians will look on this that may not, when players stop playing, you tend to forget how good they were in situations. And, some of that's happened with Michael Jordan. About this guy was truly amazing player. And then some people are, making comparisons to other players. And, and I think Lamar may fall to that victim. And I hope he does it, because Lamar needs to win one because he's just outstanding at what he does. But, the fact is Lamar's 3-5 in the playoffs, has 11 turnovers with 10 passing TDs. And I think those statistics, people will throw up statistics and they take on a life of its own, and that's how Lamar may be remembered. But
let me
Lamar,
ask you something then. Like, do you, so I'm more of a, like, I'm very conservative in my takes, because you get a small sample
yeah.
in the NFL and football in general. And I agree with you that Lamar has underimpressed in the playoffs. Is that because teams are figuring him out? Because, like, I think he's sort of unfigureoutable. I mean, like, he's a good pocket passer, he's a good runner. So the question is he choking in the playoffs, or are we just talking about small sample and against good teams, and this is just what he is against good teams in the playoffs?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, clearly, John Harbaugh is a Super Bowl winning coach, right? I mean, he's won a Super Bowl, won it with Flacco. Clearly, a really incredible coach in many aspects. And now it comes down to Lamar, and Lamar's got to earn his stripes, so to speak, in that. 2 years ago, I think you could put it on Lamar, because the Chiefs had a really good plan when the Ravens played the Chiefs at home, and all they did was just blitz Lamar, and they sped up him. And the knock after that season, he was not a high level processor, and all you had to do was blitz him severely in the playoffs, and that he would not make good decisions, forced them to throw the ball. They abandoned the run, which was something they shouldn't have done. Last year was a little bit different. Lamar played exceptional. I thought he did really well, and I thought Baltimore should have won that game. But unfortunately, Mark Andrews had the worst game of his career. He's had an amazing career, but turnovers and drops, and certainly that drop of that 2-point conversion at the end of the game was just a gut punch for them. Had an unbelievable roster, and this year it looks like the roster is even better for them. They feel like they've shored up their secondary now. They are going to be a tough one to handle. Will it be the team that finally gets them over the hump? I think it could be. But again, you'll have to wait till the very end for our Super Bowl predictions of where we think they're going to end up. But I think Baltimore is going to have a say in who wins the AFC, and they're going to have a say in potentially who wins the entire thing. We'll see. From a betting perspective, we always have to throw in these little nuggets on this one. But the Ravens really seem to step up their game against teams that are above 500. Last year, the Ravens were 9-2 against the spread. 9-2 straight up against teams above 500, but we're only 3-3 with teams that were below 500. There seems to be a little bit of a letdown with them, but again, very dominant, very, very great from a betting perspective to bet the Ravens if you're ever any doubts of what to play in a weekend and need some action or want some action. The Ravens are never a bad bet, especially when they're playing good teams, because they absolutely do it. I know they brought in Malachi Starks. You're familiar with him, right? Remember Malachi Starks? They drafted him this year.
Mm-hmm.
He should be really good, should help shore up that defense as well. I think they're going to be really, really good. Once they moved Kyle Hamilton back to safety last year, their secondary really shaped up well. The only concern there is that they lost their nose tackle Michael Pierce in the offseason. The Bills early should test that run defense, and we'll find out early in that very first game on Sunday Night Football if, in fact, that is going to be a problem for them or not. That may be the only thing that I'm concerned about with this team. Does this team give you any pause at all? You
can nitpick, issues with every team in the NFL. This team, apart from the Eagles, this team is one of those teams with like the fewest things to nitpick.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I really think that if Baltimore wins that game last year against Buffalo, that they win, that they go in and beat the Chiefs, and I think it's Baltimore and the Eagles for the Super Bowl, and that would have been a fun one to watch. I wish we could have seen that one last year. That would have been a good one. Speaking of teams who aspire to be Super Bowls and certainly have an offensive juggernaut as a potential Super Bowl contender, but the defense just continues to let them down. And again, you kind of point back to ownership again, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals and where you think they stack up.
I mean, I'm not an expert on the Cincinnati Bengals, but yeah, I will say that like I agree that with other other analysts that Joe Burrow is among the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. He may be even better than that with a better supporting cast. He does have those wide receivers that help him out, but apart from that, the Bengals organization is just kind of a basket case and always has been. So it's sad for him. You'd like to see him succeed. I'm a Joe Burrow fan, but as far as the Bengals in general, I just don't expect a lot from them. He'll do more than his part, and they will still underperform.
Yeah, no, I continue to agree. I mean, look, if the Bengals had just been average last year, then at defense, then they're a playoff team. But they weren't even average last year. I mean, they're teams last year who scored 30 points last season. The Bills scored 30 points, 12, were 11-1. The Ravens scored 30 points, 11, were 11-0. The Lions scored 30 points 10 times and were 9-1. The Packers scored 30 points, over 30 points, 8 times, were 7-1. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers scored 30 points 8 times, were 6-2. The Bengals scored 30 points 8 times as well, and they were 4-4. This is 4 losses when scoring 30 points or more is tied for the most losses in NFL history for that statistic. I mean, it's just it really comes down to Cincinnati's ownership. We talked about you can always trace it back when you see the teams that aren't doing well, whether it's Cleveland, whether it's the Jets, whether it's even Miami. It comes down to ownership, and and Cincinnati's no different here. I mean, Cincinnati's ownership is one of the poorest in NFL's. They had to sell the naming rights to the stadium just to pay Joe Burrow's contract. So again, they're playing hardball with Trey Hendrickson right now. Look, if Trey Hendrickson is not on this defensive side, if he somehow gets traded away, I don't think that'll happen. I think they'll reach an agreement there. I mean, it looks like the years and the money are right. It's just a guarantee. Trey Hendrickson wants 3. The Bengals want to pay him 1. Kind of feels like a 2 is going to be in there. 2-year guarantee. But again, this guy's got 34 sacks in the past 2 years. You got to pay him. I do not think Lou Anarumo was the problem last year at defensive coordinator. You're bringing Al Golden from Notre Dame. I don't think that fixes things there in Cincinnati. Maybe has a fresh face to do things, but you almost wonder, is this a Carson Palmer type situation where Joe Burrow has to retire? I mean, the new collective bargaining agreement, they've really got you you got your rights. You signed that contract. You're kind of there, and Joe Burrow would just be, I just think he's kind of stuck. I mean, is there any recourse for Joe Burrow, or you just think this is just a bad situation here for them?
He wound up in a black hole. Black holes can overcome light itself, and the Bengals are one of those black holes in the NFL, and he may have recourse in a retirement thing. I think Uncle Phil, I think you're the person I heard that strategy from, is that he may be able to escape the black hole by retiring. And I think I don't know what you have to do. Like, you have to sit out a year or something and come back and maybe then be a free agent, right? That'd be cool.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think they still own your contract for a certain amount of time, but it could be that way. But again, from a betting perspective, the Bengals still did very nicely, but you still just had to know how to play them. As from against the side spread standpoint, they were 9-5 as favorites, and only 1-2 as an underdog against teams that were above 500. They were 3-6, so not a very good cover there. But against teams that are below 500, they went 7-1 against the spread. So definitely something to think about this year when looking at that, because this is a team that's certainly loaded offensively. But again, can they be this great team? We talked about, Howie Roseman being this good GM and how he is, great at drafting. It's not just him. He's got a great team of scouts that work for him in conjunction with him that are watching these films and doing that. The Bengals have the lowest number of scouts of any NFL team. Again, just a very poor team. When the media guides all went to color at one point, guess who was the last to put out a color media guide? Yes, it was the Bengals. So
because of the cost.
Yeah.
So the question is, and I don't know much about the ownership other than they don't spend a lot on the team, but is that because they're cash poor? So they have an asset that's worth a lot of money, but they're cash poor, because, whatever businesses they're in, it's not kicking off enough cash to take care of operations. Is that the issue?
That's right.
And I think the NFL would be, it would behoove Goodell then to potentially, approach them with this idea of maybe let's take the Bengals off your hands and let's get them to an owner with, that can spend on the team, because it's bad for the NFL to have these perpetually weak, sick organizations, right.
Especially when you have a Joe Burrow, a transformational. Because it's last year he wins the MVP. Josh Allen does not win the MVP last year. Joe Burrow wins the MVP if their defense is just average, because he had a better year statistically than any other quarterback last year, except for that passer rating statistic with Lamar. But every other thing that you could want from a quarterback, Joe Burrow does. And if you talk to players who is top quarterbacks, they're always naming Joe Burrow. He stays in there and just takes lick after lick after lick, and gets hurt because they won't give him an offensive line. And, it's a tough thing to watch. I know Ohio is home for him, but I wish he were in a better organization, because, man, he is really, really fun to watch. And I just can't even imagine Joe Burrow with an offensive line, what he could actually do, and he might even have to have elite weapons, just have decent weapons and just a great offensive line. He's just really phenomenal in what he does. So we'll see how that works out. But let's go to another team. It's hard to believe, but another team with even worse ownership, and that is the Cleveland Browns. And Jimmy Haslam, who is probably now that Dan Snyder's out of the league, probably the next worst owner in the entire NFL. Just an example of what he does is that when he drafted Johnny Manziel, supposedly they spent about $100,000 evaluating Teddy Bridgewater, and that's who they were going to draft in that draft. And then a homeless man on the street literally told Jimmy Haslam to draft Johnny Manziel, and that's what he did. And that was the impulsive thing. How can you? How do you do that? I don't know.
Probably thought it was a message from God or something. He might be a religious man.
I guess, I don't know. But it, from a pocketbook's perspective, it certainly does play out for you if you're betting against the Browns last year. When the Browns were actually favorites, they were 0-4 against the spread. So find that an opportunity there this year. Again, this is a great opportunity for you. For those of you that are looking to make making a little pay for dinner on Saturday night, this is a great way to do it. But betting against the Browns as favorites, because typically they don't cover in those situations. So it certainly didn't last year. And again, because there's really been no real change structurally to this team. The ownership's still in place, coach still in place, GM, owner, everything. You've just got Flacco at the helm this year. We'll kind of see how that goes. But again, just not a great situation there. Kind of feels like that this may be one of the teams that could be quietly tanking. I know no NFL team tanks. Those guys are all out there playing their hearts out because they're trying to play. If it's not for this job, it's for the next one, for the next team. But from an ownership standpoint, it sure feels like it.
Man, they're so bad they don't even need to tank. That's the problem with the Browns. They're so bad they can play their best and still be the worst. Right? But I will say this: the only positive thing I could say about the Browns is that they had the most negative turnover differential in the entire NFL last year. And again, that's a stat that does change games, that does turn games. And that is not highly controllable, right? It does tend to regress, and so they were minus 22 in turnover margin, and that's the only positive thing I can say about them is that will probably regress a little bit, and they might squeak a couple of wins out of that regression. But they could play their best and still be the worst. I don't think they need to tank.
From a strength of schedule, I'll leave it at this, but the strength of schedule, Browns had the second hardest schedule in the NFL this year. And the way I do strength of schedule, the way I look at it is how there's a couple ways you can do it. You can look at last year's teams and wins and then kind of rack them and stack them from there. The way I look at it is how Vegas does the win totals this year and the teams they're playing against. By that, I think that's a more forward-looking, more accurate view. And I think that from that view, Cleveland has the second hardest schedule going in. So they're carrying 4 quarterbacks going in this year, and I think at some point we see all 4 just because I think this is going to be a brutal year for Cleveland and not very optimistic. I think to steal your phrase, I think it's situation normal for them. Talking about a team that's not situation normal but may still be, we'll see. But the last team that we're talking about in the AFC North, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Being a Green Bay Packers fan, how is it for you seeing Aaron Rodgers in a different team's uniform? I mean, last year was the Jets, and now it's the Steelers. Does that even make sense to you?
It makes sense based on what their options were. I am a Packers fan, and I have a love-hate relationship with Aaron Rodgers, and I'm actually a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. That's like one of my tertiary teams. I like the Steelers. Yeah. I think the Steelers. I think the Steelers actually fit this mold. Because everybody's trying to put like the Bills and the Ravens in this kind of like, oh, you're good but not good enough. I think that's NFL. You're small sample size. They just haven't gone over the hump because somebody else does, and only one team gets to win. But I think you can put Steelers in that actual mold of like they're good but not good enough, and I think the reason is because their organization is good and it has continuity, and that continuity enables them to beat most of the teams that have chaos in their organizations every year. But the continuity is with people who are not the highest level, and so their continuity enables them to be good but not great every single year, and that's what you get. And but I do think that despite my issues with Aaron Rodgers, the guy is probably the most accurate passer in the history of the game. The guy can still play, and I think he gives them a boost this year. What do you think?
Well, I think he could. Look, I mean, I've seen video of him. He didn't play in the preseason, obviously, really no need to for him. But I think in some ways there probably is because, again, Aaron Rodgers is not real big into OTAs and minicamp and kind of shows up late. And so we'll see how the chemistry works in actual games. So I think it might be a little bit of a rough start for Pittsburgh to see how that's actually going to go. But the video I have seen of him in training camp, he looks like he's even taken another Father Time is catching up with him in the speed. Again, he can still sling it. His arm is great. That's not the issue with older quarterbacks. The arms don't give out. It's the legs, and it's throwing the ball and turning those hips. And it'll just be interesting to see how that goes for the Steelers. Again, I would not play the Steelers early this year, because I still think you're going to be meshing Arthur Smith's offense and Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers doesn't like a lot of pre-snap motion because he likes to see where the defense is. Arthur Smith likes pre-snap motion. So we'll see how that actually – I'm interested to see how that plays out. This is, an interesting deal. I mean, certainly Tomlin is one of those old school defensive head coaches. This is the fourth year in a row that they've spent the most of any team out there on defense. The fourth season in a row. There's a scout I know that talked with one of the Rooneys. It was like the Rooneys. Well, I won't even get into which one, but they talked with one of the Rooneys at a party. They were having some cocktails, and it was a couple years ago. And they were literally talking about how, that they were kind of tired of Tomlin, but he keeps going over that hump and maintaining that winning record. And they just feel like it's kind of a bad look to part. But you could see that this year, if things don't go well with Aaron Rodgers and Tomlin finishes with that below 500 mark, because that's kind of his moniker, what he's known for. It's not like, hey, we're known for playoffs wins. It's like, hey, at least Tomlin has a winning season. It's you kind of shifted the goals a little bit of what you're shooting for. But you could potentially see this potentially out of the blue being one of the 6 or 7, which is always it is. It's 6 or 7 new head coaches every year. Can't imagine the Pittsburgh Steelers with one, but you kind of feel like it might be. There's rumors been around for a while that Tomlin could move up into the booth and be just a great analyst, and he would be phenomenal. Really would be. He'd be kind of like Gruden. He'd be must watch, and he'd be much a must listen to in the booth. But we'll see how it goes. I just don't. What do you think about? I want to ask you about going back to what I said about the blending of Arthur Smith's how he wants to play offense, Aaron Rodgers. Do you see any tug of war, and who wins that battle of how that's going to go?
Well, Aaron Rodgers is going to win, or he's going to take his ball and go home. I mean, that's the problem. And by the way, I think that's the reason why LaFleur is actually able to get performance out of him, because Aaron Rodgers has always been self-centered and he's always been lazy. And LaFleur is actually able to, with the Packers, LaFleur was actually able to work with that and get some production out of him. So he is dangerous in that way. Now, the guy can play. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks ever, but he's self-centered and lazy. And the quarterback is, the quarterback is going to get his way, man. He's going to win that. Now, the problem is he might be running into a guy who's just as headstrong as he is. And let me just say about Tomlin, I like Tomlin. I think Tomlin is the reason why Pittsburgh has been as good as it is, but it's also the reason why they haven't been great. So he's good but not great, and that's why Pittsburgh is good but not great. And so they do have to kind of make a decision about, like, hey, do we want to be great, or are we okay with just being good? Now, I will say the most positive thing I can say about Pittsburgh is they had the second negative thing. Change my position there, but the most negative thing I can say about Pittsburgh is that they had the second highest positive turnover differential last year, and you would expect that to regress against them this year. And at plus 16 last year, that could turn into 3 additional losses this year, something like that, in that neighborhood if it regresses, which you expected.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't feel like Pittsburgh was a playoff team last year, but they kept getting breaks early in the year of who they were playing. Like, they played the Chargers earlier, and Herbert had to sit out. He was hurt. And so they won that game. And so it's just they caught some breaks last year. But, again, this is going to be a tough schedule. Their strength of schedule is 13th. It's the tough late schedule with one opponent in the final 10 weeks that had under 8 wins in 2024. So they better get their wins early this year because, and like I said, I don't know that they're going to, because Aaron Rodgers, again, didn't play in the preseason, didn't participate in any of the early camps, has been his style lately, to your point, very selfish, very about himself, not necessarily about the team. And, it could come back to haunt him, and this could be, I think, their ceiling to me seems good, not great, but their floor seems like it could potentially fall apart. Again, with Aaron Rodgers, you need an offensive line. They don't have an offensive line. That's not how Tomlin builds things. They haven't had a good offensive line in a long time. They lost Najee Harris, over to the Chargers, so they lost a running back. They again don't have a great offensive line. I think this has a wide variability to me. but it could potentially go south.
It could, but they're the Steelers, and they have pretty good continuity. Now, another thing I will say about Rodgers is he is locker room cancer. So that locker room cancer could spread and become malignant. Especially if they get off to a bad start because he's been self-centered and lazy and hasn't been working with the team and his new receivers. Right. So that guy, that's why, love hate, man. I mean, he's going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and probably the one who underachieved his talent the most of any quarterback of all time. He's an enigma, but I could see it going. The only way I could see the Steelers kind of falling off this good but not great plateau is if the Aaron Rodgers locker room cancer becomes malignant and spreads.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, again, we're an offensive league. Can Aaron Rodgers go point for point with some of these elite offenses? And that's going to be a struggle for them. I don't know that. They're going to have to be able to do that. The Steelers were the only team in the NFL to score 0 points in the final 2 minutes of regulation when trailing last season. So we'll see how it does, see if that can turn around. Joe, it's time again to rack them and stack them. How do you see this division playing up between, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh?
So the bottom and the top are easy. I mean, the Ravens are clearly still the best team in this division by far, and so it's the middle that's hard. And I'm going to say the Bengals were close last year. They're going to trade places with the Steelers this year and be number 2. The Steelers probably won't fall off much, but they'll be number 3, and then the Browns will still be the bottom feeders, a distant 4th.
I kind of feel the same way you do. I mean, like I said, I'd like to mix it up and disagree, but I don't. Again, we don't talk about this beforehand because we try to not leave our best stuff on the cutting room floor. We try to bring it all to you guys in the audience so that everything's fresh and authentic. But I feel the same way. I do. I feel like that this feels like the AFC East, where you have the Bills and the Patriots, kind of same way here. You have the strong, the Ravens, and you also have Cincinnati here. You feel like the other two teams are kind of looks like they're going to be at the bottom. I do feel like you do, that the Steelers and the Bengals will trade places this year. Steelers coming in 3rd. Cincinnati, of course, in the Arch Manning sweepstakes, or whoever it is, with this great NFL class. But again, we didn't even talk about the thing with the Steelers this year is that, look, go out and get Aaron Rodgers, but he may play just well enough that takes you out of those top quarterbacks. That this is widely regarded as one of the best quarterbacks classes that are coming in this year. So we'll see. Feel like they're playing for 1 year. Rodgers certainly made it clear that he's only signing a 1-year contract. He's only doing this. We'll see if this whole thing blows up to that this year, including Tomlin, which would be an interesting deal of how this goes. Hate to see Tomlin go out like that, but as you and I have talked about, and you stated so well, Rodgers is a locker room cancer. And is not the most team-oriented guy, and that could go very south for them. Guys, thanks for tuning in for the AFC North. Really excited for you to join us. Look for us tomorrow where we break down the AFC South and continue on. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Follow me at please like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on X. Follow me on TikTok. Follow me on Instagram at Uncle Phil's Locks. And please, if you're interested in action a little bit more serious, then go to UnclePhil'sLocks.com, where I have got some packages for the season and weekly as well, and would love to have you there and join in. But guys, again, thanks for tuning in. As always, let's roll.